So good afternoon, everybody. Concussion in professional team sports, time for harmonized approach. This is the title of my PhD dissertation. My research is based on case studies. It proposed a harmonized solution to better regulate concussion across countries and sports. So let's start with a geographical overview of the concussion controversy in professional team sports, class action and CT cases. There were numerous sports governing bodies sued in the US and Canada during the past few years, including the National Football League, the National Hockey League, FIFA, USA Water Polo, and the Canadian Football League. Australian leagues are not spared either. There were several class actions announced in Australia, notably against the Australian Football League and the National Rugby League. And there are several individual lawsuits pending against clubs in Australia. With regard to CT cases, multiple CT cases have now been diagnosed in team sports, including American football, Canadian football, Australian rules football, football, ice hockey, baseball, rugby union, and rugby league. This is my research question. How can we reduce or prevent the public health risk of the occurrence of concussion, including its long-term health effects to athletes? And how can we reduce or prevent the consequent legal risk that we want to sport governing bodies? The originality and significance of my research. So far, people had only examined the concussion issue within one sport, within one country. I come up with a harmonized solution. This is the first time things have been put together and analyzed in a critical way. And my research is of great significance in terms of social, economic, and public health viewpoints, and not only for professional sports and professional team sports, but also for grassroots sports. And the scope of my research, so I focus on professional team sports. This excludes elite sports, grassroots sports, individual sports, but my proposal will be useful and will indirectly impact these fields. Structure, content, and methodology of my research. So in chapter 1, I have an introduction. Chapter 2, a medical overview. So I did interdisciplinary research. Chapter 3, national case studies. So my national case studies focus on the most relevant and affected countries in sports. So I focused on countries in sport which have a history of or potential for CT and litigation. This includes, of course, Australia. In chapter 4, I identified general trends. Chapter 5, I propose harmonized reform. So I didn't want to start from scratch. That's why I used the anti-doping system as a guiding thread. Chapter 6, a conclusion. And the methodology, I used mixed method, doctrinal, and comparative rule methods. My main findings in overall terms, so the concussion controversy is expanding in terms of CT cases, in terms of class action. While sports governing bodies and to a lesser extent governments have recently made notable regulatory efforts, opportunities for further improvement exist. So right now governments are poorly involved and their action mainly focuses on grassroots sports and youth sports. So I really would like governments to step in because it's a public health issue. Current efforts are taking place within a framework that is too opaque, conflictive, defensive, and self-centered. And finally, harmonized reforms are urgently necessary given the ongoing nature of the concussion controversy across countries in sport and the need for sport to operate internationally. My proposed reforms, so anti-doping as a main source of inspiration. There are several similarities between anti-doping and the regulation of concussion. The most obvious one is the public health aspect. But there are also differences between anti-doping and the regulation of concussion. For instance, anti-doping, it's about punishing. It has a disciplinary nature, whereas the regulation of concussion, it's more about prevention and compensation. So I had to be careful when I made comparison. And also I use match fixing and spectator violence as a subsidiary source of inspiration. So the main feature of anti-doping, as you probably know, there is a World Anti-Doping Agency, a World Anti-Doping Code, the WADA code, UNESCO Convention, which is binding for governments, and the Court of Arbitration for Sport. On this basis, I propose some reforms, a World Sport Safety Agency, an international standard on concussion, which could provide guidance for sports governing bodies regarding the rules of play, rules of the game, concussion management protocols, education, research, data collection, financial support to injured athletes, etc. UNESCO Convention for governments, again, like in doping, governments could fund research, education, and like in doping, governments could withdraw their financial support for non-compliant sports organizations. And the Court of Arbitration for Sport could intervene. It shouldn't be a compulsory intervention, but it could be of interest, could be a good option. The benefits, so we go back to my research question. My reforms would reduce the risk of injury to professional athletes, reduce the risk of litigation. There would also be more transparency and collaboration between stakeholders. My reforms would bring impetus and power of constraint from governments. Right now, some sports organizations adopted a wait-and-see approach, maybe not in Australia, maybe not in the US, but in Europe, where I am right now. Positive effect on grassroots sports. Think about FIFA. If FIFA adopts new rules of play, it's going to trickle down to lower levels. And my reforms will also have a positive effect on individual sports or even other types of injuries, to an extent that will need to be determined by further research. There will be some hurdles, so funding, like for every important large-scale project. You will also have to convince sports governing bodies to surrender part of their authority. It will be hard also to attract sports league, non-Olympic sports, because the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, has authority over Olympic sports only. And for Olympic sport, the IOC could say, okay, if you don't follow these rules, you won't take part in the Olympic Games. But it wouldn't be possible for leagues, sports leagues. And finally, the challenge of sustaining a strong effect. Of course, we don't want window dressing, so we need efficient measures. So my presentation was very short. For further information, so you can have a look at my PhD dissertation, which is now available as a book. There is also a summary of my main findings and proposals available on Medium. It's a very short article, 5-minute read. More detailed presentation is available. I did a presentation for Mercer Marsh benefits last July, so it's 45 minutes. It's more detailed, and my contact details. I would be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.